Hey, what's up, guys? It's Retro here with the rerun. Tuning in to the most okay furry retro gaming and nostalgia podcast. And again, I'm Retro Coyote. So today we're doing another reaction video. I'm actually enjoying doing these. These are a lot of fun, and there are a lot of really great content creators out there that I'm a big fan of who touch on the topics I enjoy, and I enjoy hearing their perspective. So today, we're going to be checking out a video from Extra Mint, who I believe we've also taken a look at here on this channel before. Why isn't the future exciting anymore? He is going into the 2010s and taking a look at that span of time based off what I read from the... I haven't seen the video yet, but before we get into that, guys, a couple things. First off, if you enjoy the content here on this channel, then please make sure to like and subscribe. We're growing our community here all the time, and guys, you know I'd love to have you with. Also, if you want to support the channel more directly and get a shout out here in the video, then please check out my Patreon. It's only $1 a month, and it gets you access to our community Discord. It's going to be linked down in the description below. Also, give love to the original creator, Extra Mint. His video is really good. I will put a link to his original video down in the comments, which is what I should have been doing a lot of these reaction videos, but I haven't because I didn't think to do that, so shame on me. Anyway, yeah, a little bit of housekeeping. I've been finally, if you've been watching my shorts, you know I was finally able to get moving on the Pokemon Ribbon Master project. I was finally able to move my Pokemon from the Game Boy game, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So we'll go over that in more detail in a later video once I get further along in that process. But that being said, guys, let's just jump right on into it. I'm going to react to Extra Mint's perspective here on the 2010s. It's a bit far off from our usual time frame of late 90s, early 2000s. But that being said, it's a span of time that a lot of people, especially the younger members of my audience, might be nostalgic for. It's a time that we saw a lot of stuff like Rudiger Arrow, stuff like that. So there's a lot of iconography there in that time span, and so it's certainly worth looking at. So we're going to check it out. So I am going to just hop on over to the video. I'm going to turn on subtitles. Thank you.
When was the last time the future felt exciting? The 60s, 80s, 2000s? What about the 2010s? What did the future look like then, and how much of it came true? I didn't think I'd find anything, but I did. I was able to narrow it down to three main visions, aesthetics that you'll remember from countless movies, TV shows, and games. I want to find out how accurate they were, why my iPhone isn't see-through, and what happened to the future we were promised.
I remember that for a hot minute. Everyone was thinking our tech was going to be glass and see-through and transparent. I don't want that. Just from a privacy perspective. I don't want someone seeing what I'm doing on my phone. I can be looking at weird stuff on there. You don't know. Stop looking at my phone. Anyway.
Futurism is different for every decade. The space age vision of the 60s was the polar opposite of the 80s obsession with cyberpunk. But I've also found that decades often had multiple competing ideas. If you grew up in the 2000s, you'll likely remember too. The early years predicted a world full of chrome and translucent technology, but this eventually morphed into a glossy eco-utopia, complete with bubbles and bokeh. I have a feeling a similar thing happened in the 2010s, so remember that for later on. Anyway, the 2010s. It isn't nearly as documented as anything before it, but there's still something there. And it looks like this. Sharp angles and glossy, reflective surfaces, accented by neon highlights. Tron Legacy is the best example, as it's in everything from the outfits to the city itself. Technology is sleek and futuristic, but in a different way to the 2000s. Y2K futurism, with its shiny gadgets and clothing, felt far more chaotic and personalized, compared to the sleekness of the 2010s. Things are unnatural unnaturally sterile, and any element of personal expression is washed out by the cold, symmetrical environments. It does look cool though, and when Legacy released in 2010, not many people disagreed. That's why you started to see similar things in advertising and video games. Making a futuristic level now meant covering everything in metal plating and adding light blue or orange accents. Several franchises took this to the next level, replacing the entire art style of enemy factions in favor of this refined modern look.
Oh my god.
Gaming peripheral.
Yes. I noticed they did that with, like, I think Halo 4 is when they started doing that. I didn't like it. I mean, call me an old man, but like Halo 1 to 3 had the perfect trilogy there, and 4 onward they kind of messed it up. Anyway, that's just me being an old man.
Were even worse, and suddenly everything was presented with underglow and angular black panels. More on that soon. You'll notice something else though, something that sets it even further apart from the late 2000s. The complete lack of nature. There's no room for it in these pristine landscapes, and if it is there at all, it's tightly controlled or contained within some biopreservation unit. You might be wondering if this look has a name, in which case, welcome to the channel. I haven't seen you here before. If you like learning what incredibly niche stuff is and why it is, subscribe and keep watching. Because I'm sure this wasn't the only expectation you had for the future in the 2010s. Maybe you thought we'd go in a completely different direction and have houses covered in moss and solar panels. Perhaps you thought computers would just be floating touchscreen panels by now, and iPhones would be see-through. If so, that wasn't an accident. There's some pretty weird reasons for all of it, and stranger still is the stuff that actually came true. Remember that period on YouTube where the site was full of leaked concept art for consoles and
Oh my
phones?
God,
If the
I
answer's
hated
yes,
that.
I'm willing to bet you're still waiting on translucent tech. Floating screens were the most advanced thing we could dream up in the 2010s, and you saw this everywhere in movies and media. Like the Avengers. You could never tell what they were actually doing on them, but everyone had a giant holographic interface. There's that scene in Iron Man where he's designing his suit and he's got this whole setup with a virtual keyboard and 6 monitors. And to move stuff around, he just waves his hands in the air. I'd love to see the unedited outtakes of these. It'd just look like Robert Downey Jr. talking mad shit in sign language.
Fuck you, man!
This whole idea had been around for a while though
would-
in sci-fi.
yeah.
It just really took off in the 2010s because it didn't cost $1 billion to render anymore. Like Tom Cruise had the tech back in 2002 in The
Yeah.
Minority Report. Again, he's doing the aggressive hand signals, muttering to himself mysteriously, and scrolling through completely unrelated images. What does 69 have to do with anything, bro? Anyway, I named
Nice.
this section after a YouTube video from 14 years ago, where most of these ideas were crystallized and imagined in a practical sense. A Day Made of Glass was made specifically as a vision of the near future. And this video goes hard. There's see-through phones. Almost every surface is touchscreen. Growing up, I couldn't wait for this stuff. To me, this is one of the clearest examples of 2010s futurism. What I find interesting is the way every decade tends to imagine the future through its own current aesthetic.
Yeah.
In the 60s, tomorrow's cars looked just like their own. The 2000s figured rounded chrome technology would still be hot in 2040. And in the 2010s, with the popularity of touchscreens and minimalist user interfaces, we saw
Okay, hear me out. So the iPhone 17 just came out, and everyone's like, "Ooh, ha! What, you know? It's a new Apple phone, whatever." How cool would it be? And this is just me. How cool would it be to have instead of like a color, have it be chrome? Again, that's just me, but I think that would be cool.
a world where they became everything. But some predictions are more accurate than others, and you may have noticed that some of the stuff shown in this video isn't exactly futuristic anymore. Because we have all of it. Almost. Remote control goon shield? Yeah. Touchscreen fridge? For sure. Car screens, flexible displays? Most of this stuff is either in your house already or entirely possible to make. I've even been working on something myself. Make her 30 feet tall, increase custard volume by 40%. 60, and Jarvis, disable all notifications from Indeed.com. You know how I feel about the J word. I'm just so tired and thirsty.
Have you tried Gamer Sups, sir?
Talk to me.
Well, they're packed with vitamins, caffeine, and have zero sugar.
What are these flavors? Lean?
Anime Girl 5?
I need to try this. And so do you. Using code MINT will get you 10% off all of these crazy flavors. It'll also get you free samples with no shipping cost, so you can just give them a try. All you have to do is click the link in the description. Seriously though, huge thanks to everyone who's using the code. Your support means the world and helps me to continue making videos like this one. At the same time though, it's shown that some of these were never good ideas. Like screens in cars. I'll be honest, I like mine, but the fact is, it's harder to use while driving than a simple analog dashboard, which for the record have always looked cooler anyway. Nowadays you have to hack into the Pentagon with a single finger to even turn on your air conditioning. Plus, because screens are flat and not as tactile as actual buttons, you can't do any of that unless you're looking at them. Even more so when it's bumpy. So they're not only dangerous, but incredibly inefficient. Phones have also made a lot of this stuff less practical. A touchscreen fridge is cool and all, but when you're rarely without your phone, it starts to look more like a $2,000 novelty. Still, there remains a strong fascination with holographic interfaces and this idea that futuristic technology should resemble a sheet of glass. It's partly why Apple spent billions making the Vision Pro. While wearing it, the future shown in Minority Report and The Avengers is fully realized. You control everything with your hands, and the UI has the same semi-transparent glassy look. Don't get me wrong.
Who remembers this? And has anyone used this? Let me know in the comments. But oh my goodness gracious. They tried this with the Google Glass. It did not work.
This thing is ridiculous and expensive, but I guarantee you in 10 years you'll have someone like me saying, I miss when Apple used to make futuristic designs and took risks. In fact, that will be me. Just like in the 2000s, they're trying to sell us products from the future as we currently imagine it. Only this time, we're getting a little closer. I'm going to talk about this more when iOS 26 drops, but the whole glass thing isn't slowing down. Look at glass morphism, a term that describes the resurgence of translucent, rounded UI. Apple's liquid glass is a prime example, having reflections and frosted surfaces that mirror the behavior of, well, glass. I feel like this is one of those things you either like or really strongly dislike, so let me know what you think. Personally, I reckon it needs work and a bit more color, but certain features look awesome, like the little bubble that pops up when you select text. At the very least, it's a nice change from flat design. Anyway, there you have it. A day of glass might have been closer to reality than it seemed in 2011. But that's not the case for the next style, which is far too dystopian to ever come true. Unless... It's no secret that a lot of things started to look boring in the 2010s. Flat design replaced Frutiger Aero, and products and marketing lost the edge they had in the 2000s. But that's not entirely true, and there was a successor to the bubbly future of the past. It's easy to overlook, but impossible to miss once you notice it. When I found out what it was called, it immediately made sense. Coined by Michael O'Donnell, Hexatron describes the angular sci-fi worlds of the tens. It's in
Hexatron sounds like a bootleg Transformer. I'm gonna make a character called Hexatron.
games like Halo 4, movies like Max Steel, but it really comes down to one defining film. Released in 2010, Tron Legacy's virtual world was praised for its vibrant, sleek aesthetic. From the sprawling grids to the glowing lines racing across every surface, it presented a sharp, symmetrical landscape. While it felt cold and authoritative, it looked amazing. The fact Daft Punk made the soundtrack didn't hurt either. Of course, Tron lines are an entire trope dating back to the first film in 1982. The association with tech isn't anything new, but Legacy was different. It modernized it with shiny surfaces and fleshed out architecture. Hexatron can also be identified through the use of hexagons. Things like energy shields and certain environments in games often use them to symbolize advanced technology. Look at Crysis 3, the UI, and especially the tutorial. It's filled with shifting hexagonal blocks lit by thin strips of light. Even the skybox is reminiscent of Tron. But while rewatching Legacy and looking into Hexatron, there was one game I couldn't get out of my mind. Halo 4. If you aren't familiar with the Halo franchise, this was one of the most controversial titles ever released. The beloved art style of the first three was completely flipped on its head and replaced by this. It's cleaner, shinier, and more artificial. This came with the introduction of a long-awaited enemy faction, the Forerunners. As a player, this wasn't your first encounter with the hyper-advanced race. The rings you'd been exploring for years were littered with their artifacts. Hundreds of millennia-old structures laying dormant as ominous reminders of their presence. But in Halo 4, they're back in the form of Prometheans. And with them is the same stylized architecture from Tron. Heavily ornamented structures with orange and light blue accents. Cortana looks a bit different too, but we'll leave it at that. Regardless, this shift helped cement the look even further. If you wanted to make a place look like it was from the year 2557, this was how you did it now. The Mirror's Edge titles are worth mentioning here too. While both have elements of Frutiger Aero, the second borrows from Hexatron a lot more. While exploring exploring the suitably named City of Glass, I found plenty of advertisements and interiors with hexagons, glowing trim, and shiny surfaces. Again, a common theme here is the lack of nature. It just doesn't have a place in such sterile environments. How about outside of video games though? Where else might you recognize Hexatron from? Well, you wouldn't have to look too far. It was, and still is, the dominant aesthetic for gaming devices. If there was even a slight chance a gamer would touch it, it'd ship with a background like this. As for peripherals, they suffered a similar fate. It was goodbye to translucent mice, those cool ones with the yummy water in them, and hello to aggressive styling and RGB strips. The same went for PC cases, where sharp angles and geometric shapes became extremely popular. And the reason is simple. They look like they belong in a world like Tron, Halo, or Mirror's Edge. Just like how Chrome Tech felt at home in The Minority Report or The Matrix. Companies know that the future is a powerful thing, and they also know what you expect it to look like. So they sell you stuff that fits the bill. Whether that stuff was successful or a bizarre catastrophic failure happens to be the next.
I might need to do. Hold on, go back. Love when they do that. Hold on. Back. I might need to do an episode on Skylanders because they were a big deal for like a hot minute, and then they died. And for years after, those guys were everywhere. So let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do an episode on Skylanders. Probably get them for cheap.
Or a bizarre catastrophic failure happens to be the next question we're asking.
Oh, no,
Guys,
I
you know we
remember
love
those. Those were
gadgets and
awful.
doohickeys on the Extra Mint channel. Luckily, the 2010s had no shortage of futuristic devices and concepts. A lot more than I expected, in fact. We're going to revisit some of the most memorable, determine which actually came true, and finally, look at the ones that failed miserably. We touched on the whole Iron Man UI thing before and how the Apple Vision is kinda getting close, but we missed out on a gadget you probably owned that was trying it a decade beforehand. The Xbox Kinect. Now, the interface was still inside another screen, but everything was motion controlled, and when it worked, it was pretty cool. The Wii had convinced people that these sorts of controls.
From what I understand, also, I know some people have hooked it up to be a relatively decent webcam, actually. And if I can get my hands on a Kinect, I'll have to look into that because I don't know if I can get it to follow me when I move. But for something like VTubing, that might actually be kind of cool. I don't know. It's something worth looking into. Project for later.
Controls were the way to go, and Xbox went all in. So much so that when the Xbox One released in 2013, every console shipped with a Kinect. For a while, it seemed like they were dead set on replacing the controller entirely. Their Smart Glass app pushed this even further, allowing you to control your console remotely with your phone. To put it bluntly, all of this failed. The Kinect was laggy, Smart Glass was more like dumbass, and the brand was left in a weird niche that placed them squarely behind PlayStation. I'm just gonna say it, if they called it the 720, all of this would have been avoided. Other notable mentions in the gaming space were the various Toys to Life games.
Yep.
These took concepts like Nintendo's e-reader and went above and beyond. The success of Skylanders made it feel like the future of gaming, if only for a few years. Looking back, I still love the idea of owning physical models of your in-game characters. Even though it's more expensive, you at least have something when the game is inevitably shut down. Sadly, that's exactly what happened to these titles. With the exception of Amiibos, every major Toys to Life franchise died in the late 2010s. If it wasn't clear in 2016, Fortnite made it obvious the next year. Microtransactions were the future.
Yeah.
What wasn't the future though was hoverboards. Every YouTuber had one, every airline immediately banned them, and I'm fairly sure they had a positive KD. We'll come back to that. Anyway, these things didn't hover or really behave any differently to electric skateboards, but the name spoke to a dream many had been chasing since Back to the Future 2. To be fair, it did make a little sense. They blew up in 2015, which was the exact year Marty McFly traveled to, and the marketing for these things was insane. I don't know how much they were paying celebrities, but these photos were all over Instagram back then. I'm gonna be honest,
I've seen a couple people bling theirs out, Bluetooth in them to play music while they were rolling around. I worked in wireless around this time, and those things were everywhere in the stores. People were rolling back and forth to help customers. So stupid.
do think some of these go hard. Not even just the outfits. You have to be a being of immense power to silently glide through a public space, standing completely erect and motionless. But the hoverboard had a fatal flaw. Not something minor either, especially if you asked any commercial airline. You see, thanks to low quality lithium-ion battery packs, many were prone to exploding. In the US alone, there were dozens of documented cases of hoverboards burning homes to the ground. As you might have guessed, this would end up taking several people's lives. Naturally, they weren't quite as popular after these incidents. You can still buy them today, I'm sure they're heavily regulated and actually safe now, but the better question has and will always be, why? Moving on, I have to give an honourable mention to the bizarre phone concepts from the early years of the decade. From the translucent iPhone 17 to the first bendable screens, people had high hopes for the future of mobiles. While most of it only became feasible 15 years later, that didn't stop companies from trying. The LG G Flex, the Samsung Galaxy Round. They look like the aftermath of one of those hydraulic press videos. And this was their default state. They flexed a little bit, but that was it. Remember the iPhone 6? They did it way better and they didn't even mean to. These were fully customizable, you could bend them into whatever you wanted. The only limit was your imagination. Either way, these weren't too far off. The market for foldable phones is bigger than ever, and
Yes.
Samsung finally made one that can withstand, existing. As far as I'm concerned, these are cool, but wake me up when you got a Nokia Morph on your wrist, or an iPhone with landing gear. Towards the start of the video, I asked you to remember that decades often had multiple visions for the future. The 2010s were no exception. On the flip side of Hexatron was an even bigger movement that favored nature and sustainability. But this phase was made up of multiple different aesthetics. Some you may have seen blow up on the internet recently, and others you might not know even had a name. Now, I've mentioned Frutiger Aero a couple times in this video and made it sound like it basically vanished at 11:59 December 31st, 2009. That's not the case though, it actually started to decline around 2013, meaning there's more Frutigooning material than I previously thought. And that's not the only reason I'm bringing it up. I have a little something to show you that I think you'll definitely like. But for anyone that hasn't heard this phrase before, Frutiger Aero is an aesthetic that started in the mid-2000s. It began as a UI design language before expanding into other mediums and being retroactively named and defined. I stumbled across a smartphone ad the other day from 2010 that demonstrates the style really well. It opens on a vibrant field with huge floating orbs in the background. There's this amalgamation of technology and logos in the center, all having Aero's signature glossy curves. These fields and environments were everywhere, in marketing, games, and movies. They speak to the idea that we've advanced and are living in this fresh, limitless world, but haven't pushed nature to the sidelines in doing so. It was almost exclusively used to sell tech products, which makes even more sense. With it, they look more inviting, eco-friendly, and less intimidating to new consumers. This is the polar opposite to Hexatron, which purposely uses more aggressive styling to appeal to niche markets like gamers. I wonder if it'll be the Gen Alpha equivalent of Frutiger Aero. Another place you'd find Aero was concept designs. Cars, computers, phones, even cities were supposed to look like this in the near future. Green and blue were the most common colors, alongside clean white finishes and glossy surfaces. This was also true for UI, being prevalent in websites, consoles, and phones.
Real talk, a place like that would be cool to visit. I would never want to live there, because to keep it clean would be stupid levels.
Nintendo used it pretty heavily for a while. It was on the Wii, the Wii U, and a bunch of games from the early 10s. Speaking of gaming, this amazing background footage didn't materialize out of thin air. I want to give a shout out to Not the Dark Lord, who's making an entire Frutiger Aero themed title on Steam. Go show some love because it looks insane. Now, a few of Aero's subgenres stuck around longer than others, like Dorfic. Featuring abstract shapes, glossy surfaces, and a single color, it had a slightly longer shelf life. We covered it in the last video, but I was left with a handful of unanswered questions. For starters, apart from being orange, how is it any different to regular Frutiger Aero? It turns out there's a couple things. Firstly, it doesn't really use elements of nature. Its shapes and patterns are sharper and more geometric. In that way, it almost acts as a middle ground between Frutiger Aero and Hexatron. The same can be said for Dark Aero, which used metal, graphite, and obsidian textures to achieve a sleeker, more serious aesthetic. It too was popular around 2015, and you'd see it adopted by a range of devices. But what about today? Did Frutiger Aero really die in the 2010s, or is it still being used? Surprisingly, it is. It's not having a full-blown comeback, but I did find several examples in the wild, like this ad for Coke's Year 3000 flavor. It's also on some advertisements for watches, specifically these G-Shocks and this one by Swatch. Even Microsoft has acknowledged it more than a few times. They've made reels, posts, and more, but are yet to bring it back in a meaningful way. Despite Frutiger Aero's gradual decline, its focus on ecofuturism lived on in a growing movement called solarpunk. This actually started in the 2010s and is still popular today. You know those memes where it's like Minecraft in real life or Super Mario Bros in real life? To me, this is kind of Frutiger Aero in real life. It's more realistic and has less floating orbs and impossible architecture. For instance, solarpunk often features buildings with grassy exteriors, also known as vertical gardens. This is a very real thing, and you can see it in Singapore, which actually set the world record for the largest. It spans the length of an entire building, but it isn't just there to look pretty. The layer of plants helps regulate the internal temperature, filters and purifies the air, and offers an ecosystem for birds and bugs. This shows that solarpunk is, at least to some degree, practical. Plus, like some other aesthetics we're about to look at, solarpunk isn't simply a product of corporations. As a movement, it champions a community-driven future built around renewable energy and ecological architecture. It's optimistic where cyberpunk was nihilist, and organic where Frutiger Aero was manufactured. This isn't to say you won't recognize it from movies, advertising, and games though. You'll find cities with a similar look in Tomorrowland and Black Panther. They're easily the minority though, and the reason why is hardly surprising. Hollywood prefers dystopias like Blade Runner, stories of rebellious loners surviving in hostile worlds. It's just more interesting to watch than narratives where collectivist societies organically mesh with nature. As a result, the future in film is almost always a hellscape. Regardless, it's unclear if we'll end up like this anyway. Despite the proven benefits of vertical gardens and green cities, solarpunk is still idealistic. It relies on a level of cooperation and long-term planning that's borderline impossible. To be fair, maybe that's not even the point. Perhaps solarpunk is less about providing an exact model for the future and more about simply reminding us that it doesn't have to look like this. On the flip side, what if nature took over entirely? Cities overrun by plants and wildlife. I don't think this is a formally recognized aesthetic, but I noticed it a lot in post-apocalyptic settings from the 2010s. I'll give you guys some examples and you can tell me if I'm onto anything here. Firstly, the actual world of Crysis 3. Set in the near future, you explore the ruins of New York City. It's been abandoned and is now overrun by vines and wildlife. Everything humanity made is deteriorating, slowly being consumed by nature. In this sense, it's similar to another huge game from 2013. The Last of Us presented yet another green apocalypse. Amidst the chaos of cordyceps, the world is somehow thriving. Even the giraffes are doing okay. Turning to movies, you can see this idea on steroids in Annihilation. Here, nature hasn't just taken back some real estate, it's evolved and mutated, and there's this really scary scene with a bear.
Shout to Extra Mint.
Although it came out in 2007, I Am Legend is also a solid example, with its take on overgrown New York. Again, it imagines the...
And it's also, if you're looking for a series to watch that exemplifies this quite well, it's called Life After People. I think it was on the History Channel, but don't quote me on that. Back when they did actual history instead of like swamp people and ice road truckers. It breaks it down into various spans of time where it tells you how human infrastructure and the stuff we leave behind will give way to nature, basically, and what the world will look like without. Very interesting.
Post-apocalyptic future isn't one of barren technological ruin, but of skyscrapers split in half by trees and deer in Times Square. The last one I'll mention is the show Life After People, which offers a more scientifical analysis of what would happen if we suddenly disappeared. Of course, this whole concept isn't unique to the 2010s. I'm pretty sure it's a process that's been happening since the dawn of man, but it was definitely more popular in video games and TV. At this point, we've covered cities of glass, neon grids, and eco-utopias. For the most part, that was what the future looked like in the 2010s. It's just a little harder to identify because some of these aesthetics never left. Hexatron is still standard for gaming devices, and apparently Kim Jong-un's new setup. The glass thing is even bigger now. There's Apple's new UI, and we're getting closer than ever to these floating interfaces. But why doesn't it feel as exciting anymore? Paradoxically, I think it's because a lot of it became possible. Things like VR released, but never really took off in the way people expected. A lot of the technological anchors of 2010s futurism turned out to be pretty impractical. The hype died down, some found niche markets, and others just faded into obscurity. For the first time ever, we started to see devices remove features. Buttons, disk drives, headphone jacks. This came immediately after periods of rapid innovation and futuristic optimism. Either way, I want to know what you think. Do you like the direction we're going in? Could solarpunk be the future? And what will iPhones look like in 2030?
Whatever they look like, I hope they're not made of glass. So that was Extra Mint's video on, the 2010s and the various kind of aesthetics. I'm a big fan of Extra Mint. Definitely check his channel out. Like I said, I'm going to put a link to the video down here in the description. Head his way, watch this video, give him some love. I'm going to comment. Yeah, so I'm going to comment here on his video, but definitely check it out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.